Hey, hello everybody. This is Gary Matheny. Thank you for joining me today. It's January 2025, and we are going to do part 4, and it's the last part, on the Midianites. What happened to the Midianites? And as you recall, the thing that triggered this research, this message, was years ago I had heard a teaching course on the history of the English language, and the professor said something like the rudimentary part of the Indo-European language to which English is in that family could be traced back to the Midianites. Now, he didn't say it 100% sure, but he was somewhere above speculation and below certainty. And part of the reason for this is that some of these languages are developed that are spoken only, and we know they lay back there in the past, but we don't know much besides that, except that we have certain clues or certain hints that help establish the history of languages. And so that spurred me to think, is this professor's observation, can that be squared with the Bible? And you'll see it has certain if, ands, and buts about it, and I can't say with certainty, but it certainly can be understood to have a connection. Part of it is because the Midianites are difficult to classify by the historians. They were portrayed as a nomadic people by some. Nomadic mean that they're here today, gone tomorrow, and so they could have been all over the Middle East at one time or the other. Some other historians say is that the Midianites were like an umbrella, and in other words, is an umbrella for a number of tribes. And like in America, I'm a Missourian. I am under the umbrella, so to speak, of being an American. So this concept of being identified in different groups depending upon the context is entirely consistent with history. So anyhow, part 4, we are going to fast forward to about 1200 BCE, before the Common Era. And so about 2000 BCE, we had Abraham. About 1500 BCE, we had Moses and the people of Israel leaving Egypt. And about 1200 BCE, we have the era of the judges, including Gideon. And so this history involving the Midianites from the Old Testament involves about 800 years, and they show up every now and then, and then there's no mention of them, and then they show up again, and the best of my knowledge, the last time they showed up in any significant way was during the time of Gideon, during the Judges, about 1200 BCE. So let's go a little bit into the history associated with the Midianites' experience with Israel during the era of the Judges, during the Gideon time period. And so we're going to start with Judges chapter 3. And basically, this is a time in which the children of Israel were essentially sharing the promised land with other tribes. which didn't particularly please the Lord. They were in the same generalized area. And it says here, and the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. And so this creates a problem. This is one of the things that the Lord was concerned about with the Israelites taking on the habits of pagan worship and serving foreign gods instead of the true and living God. And so here they are, around 1200 BCE, taking in wives from other tribes and giving their daughters to members of the other tribes, occupying that general area that we know as Canaan. And the result was that they started serving other gods. They started serving the pagan gods. In verse 7, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served Balaam and the groves. And so Balaam is one of the pagan gods that was in the area at the time, served by other tribes. So Israelites are losing their aroma, their distinction, and they are essentially becoming assimilated with the other tribes. And so when it comes to spiritual matters, being assimilated with the tribes of the world did not please God. Now we'll skip ahead to verse 12. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And so here is the Lord setting in motion judgment against Israel by strengthening one of the tribes in the general area. That is how it worked a lot. God used the other tribes to judge Israel when Israel wandered away from their path. And here in the book of Judges, we're seeing the king of the Moabites taking on strength to oppress the Israelites. And so let's skip ahead now to Judges chapter 6. And this is when the Midianites are introduced. And like I said before, there's a possibility that the Moabites were under the umbrella of the name Midianites. I don't know that for sure. The historians kind of weave and bob on this a little bit. But anyhow, the Midianites are introduced in chapter 6. Verse 1, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. Remember, the Midianites are directly ascended from Abraham. Verse 2, and the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel, and because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them the dens which are in the mountains and caves and strongholds. That means they headed for the hills. They lost their villages and towns and headed for the hills. Verse 3, and so it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites and the children of the east, even they came up against them. And so you have whole tribes coming up against Israel. Verse 4, and they encamped against them and destroyed the increase of the earth till thou come into Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep nor ox nor ass. And so here we're seeing Gaza, way back when, over 3,000 years ago. And so we still have Gaza in the Middle East now, and it is still full of turmoil. But anyhow, the Israelites were so oppressed that they were impoverished. they had their stuff taken away from them, including their livestock. Verse 6, and Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. And so this is where things actually start turning around. Take note for this in your own life. If you're going down a bad pathway that's unproductive, that's destructive, that leads to no good, and you know it, take time out to cry unto the Lord, because he'll be there and help you in your time of need. So at this, in verse 6, the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. And it came to pass when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord because of the Midianites, the Lord sent a prophet. So the Lord was sending help. The Israelites were going to get help. Verse 9. And this prophet says on behalf of the Lord, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians. So he's reminding the Israelites what the Lord had done. Delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, out of the hand of all that oppressed you, and drave them out from before you, and gave you their land. And so they were promised Canaan, they were promised the land, but they didn't follow suit. They didn't see it through. They're intermingled with the other tribes. Verse 13. And this is where we're going to see Gideon emerge. And this is in response to the prophet. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And so they're kind of like, we do all these terrible things, and bad things happen. And why are bad things happening? And where will be all his miracles, which our fathers told us of, saying, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us to the hands of the Midianites. And this is the assurance of God. They're being assured by God in verse 16. And the Lord said unto him, surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. And so here we are seeing in this particular chapter, things start to turn around in Judges chapter 6, because the Lord heard their cry. He sent a messenger, and they received a promise that things were going to change. So then we go ahead and we move here up to Judges chapter 7. And this is kind of an entertaining chapter in the Bible. And we'll get to that in a minute or two. And so, verse 1, Judges chapter 7. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, see, he had two different names depending upon the context, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched behind the well of Harod, so that the hosts of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. So they're starting to organize. They're starting to come together. The Israelite people are starting to come together. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, my own hand hath saved me. He wants to demonstrate his power in their life. And so he's basically telling Gideon that we don't need all these people. We don't need all the Israelites, because if you prevail in the strength of your own flesh and the strength of your own hand, then you'll say you did it. So God wanted to thin out the number of Israelites who headed into battle. And so starting in verse 5, we have this illustration where the Israelites are separated into groups depending upon how they drank water out of a lake or pond or river. And so if they took it by the hand and drank out of their hand, or if you kneeled down into the river and lapped it up directly from the river. And so in verse 7, And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thy hand. Let all the other people go every man unto his place. And so here, there's 300 men that can consist of the Israelite army. Verse 8, and so the people took victuals in their hand and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men. And the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. Verse 12, and the Midianites and Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along the valley like grasshoppers for multitude. And their camels were without number in the land by the seaside for multitude. So there were many, many enemies. Verse 13, and then when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow and said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came into a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And so this is a sign that things are going to work out, that they really can overcome the Midianites. They had this dream or this vision. Verse 15, and it was so when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel, and said, arise, for the Lord hath delivered unto your hand an host of Midian. And so now it's time to actually move forward. It's time to enter into the battle. And so in verse 23, and the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, and out of Asher, and out of all of Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers through all Mount Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites, take before them waters unto Bethbarah and the Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together and took the waters into Bethlehem and Jordan. And they took 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb, and they slew Oreb, and upon the rock, Oreb and Zeb, they slew the winepress of Zeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. And so they're prevailing. They subdued some princes. They're taking ground. They are winning. They are pursuing the Midianites as ordered by the Lord. Judges chapter 8. Verse 1, and when the men of Ephraim said unto him, why hast thou served us thus, that thou callest us not when thou wentest to fight against the Midianites? And they did chide with him sharply. Verse 2, and he said unto them, what I have done now in comparison of you, is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? And so Ephraim, one of the tribes of Israel, is saying, hey, we didn't get to go. You know, we got an administrative task. We got a logistics task. You know, we wanted to go do battle. But, you know, the Lord had ordered Gideon to have the army of 300 so that God could show himself strong in their life. Verse 3, and God hath delivered unto your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison of you? Then their anger was abated toward him when he had said that. So basically, they had a part to play in all this. And you know, God set the plan in action. Verse 12, and when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued after them and took the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and discomfited them all the hosts. And so now we're seeing the kings of Midian. We're seeing them succumb to the power of the Israelites. In verse 21, then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise thou and fall upon us, for as a man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and slew Zebah and Zalmunna and took away the ornaments that were on the camels' necks. So it almost sounds like the kings of the Midianites realized that they had lost and said, we lost. We have no strength. Fall upon us. Was that a request to be killed? I think that's a reasonable interpretation. And then you can see the Israelites taking the spoils, taking the ornaments that were on the camel's neck. So victory has certain benefits. To the victor belongs the spoils. And so in your life, when you are victorious, the spoils belong to you. There is reward associated with victory in your life. The Lord is with you, and he will show you the way. Verse 22. Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. Verse 23, and Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. You serve God, not man. God is not a difficult, biased, ruinous, deceitful taskmaster. He is full of loving kindness and mercy, but he is also a just God. And this is why we as believers need to give him our devotion and serve him. It is an easier thing, the yoke is light, to serve God than it is man. I don't know why that is, but it's been my experience as a Christian. Okay, and then verse 28, thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. And the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. So, what is the difference that makes a difference? You know, perhaps the most interesting time that we have analyzed here was the time of Moses. Because we've seen Jethro and his family were blessed by God because they blessed Moses and the Israelites. And furthermore, they were blessed by the Israelites. There was a blessing upon them. The Abrahamic covenant, I will bless thee, I will bless him that blesses thee, and I will curse him that curses thee. So there's a blessing associated with blessing Israel. It's the Abrahamic covenant. And so in the course of one generation, an individual family was blessed, but a people were cursed. The Midianites in general were cursed. And they were cursed because of things that they did. You know, when we went over that particular episode, they became servants of Baal-peor, one of the most wicked and evil pagan gods there was. It had a lot of off-the-wall sexual rituals associated with it. And so they lost their blessing and they became cursed. And so let's come here to Deuteronomy chapter 28. And this will show you how God works. There's a new covenant aspect to this, but we're going to take it in light of the old covenant and the people of Israel. Deuteronomy 28, verse 1. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come unto thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God. Listen to what he's saying and do what he is saying. Verse 3, blessed. 4, blessed. 5, blessed. 6, blessed. 7, the Lord shall cause thine enemies that rise up against thee to be smitten before thy face. You will win spiritual battles. 8, the Lord shall command a blessing upon thee in thy storehouses. You will have supply. Your needs will be met. And then you just continue to go through the promises of God for hearkening into his voice and doing what he says up through verse 15. And this is where the downside is. Verse 15, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. 16, cursed. 17, cursed. 18, cursed. 19, cursed. 20, cursing, vexation, and rebuke. And so the difference that makes the difference for all peoples is hearkening unto the voice of the Lord and doing what he wants to do. The Israelites needed to do that. You can lose the blessing of the Lord within a generation. When I was thinking about that, it reminded me of a speech given by Ronald Reagan in the 80s. And he was part of the World War II generation. And in one of his speeches, he said that within the course of one generation, you can lose your freedoms. And I was a baby boomer. And I've kind of like witnessed the slow erosion of freedoms over the last 40 or 50 years. This whole idea of losing your freedoms within the course of one generation seems a little bit foreign to me. But then if you look in the context he was speaking, the rise of the Nazis in the 30s, the rise of the communists 15, 20 years beforehand, the rise of this group and that group, all over Asia, Phnom Penh, genocide committed on vast scales in the 20th century. But if we hearken unto the voice of the Lord and do his will, we shall be blessed. So as New Covenant believers, we need to take some of this instruction to heart and hearken unto the voice of the Lord and do his will for our life, and good things will happen. We shall be blessed. Everybody have a good day. God bless you. Take care.